She was never you, a room full of silence. The room had been loud only a moment before. There had been conversations crossing over one another, glasses touching the table, nervous laughter, phones lighting up and disappearing beneath palms. People had been pretending everything was normal because pretending was easier than admitting what everyone already sensed. Then he spoke. His voice was not loud. That was what made it worse. He looked at her, his eyes carrying months of words he had swallowed, and said quietly, "She was never you." Nobody moved. The sentence seemed to fall into the center of the room like something fragile and dangerous. The woman standing across from him stopped breathing for a second. She had expected many things from that evening. An argument. An accusation. Maybe another excuse. Maybe another carefully constructed lie. But she had not expected those 5 words. She was never you. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Someone at the far end of the room lowered their glass. Another person looked toward the floor. Even the people who had been pretending not to listen could no longer pretend. Because everyone understood what those words meant. He had compared 2 lives. 2 choices. 2 kinds of love. And finally, after all the confusion, he had admitted that the person he had been trying to replace was someone he had never truly stopped loving. She wiped beneath one eye. Then another tear appeared. She tried to laugh, but the sound broke before it became laughter. "You're saying that now?" she whispered. He didn't answer immediately. He looked exhausted. Not physically exhausted. Soul exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from running away from one truth for too long. "I should have said it before," he finally replied. Her tears came faster. "You should have said it before," she repeated. He nodded. "I know. You let me believe I mattered." "You did matter." "No." She shook her head. "Don't make it sound beautiful now. Don't turn this into some noble confession. You knew." He lowered his eyes. "Yes." The room remained silent. She stared at him as though searching his face for the person she thought she knew. "You knew she was still in your heart?" "Yes." "And you still came to me?" "Yes." "And you still told me you were ready?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." A tear rolled down her cheek. "Then why?" He took a slow breath. "Because I was afraid." She laughed bitterly. "Afraid of what?" "Being alone." That answer hurt more than she expected. Because suddenly everything made sense. The late-night calls. The emotional distance. The sudden disappearances. The comparisons he never admitted were comparisons. The way he looked somewhere else whenever she spoke about forever. She had mistaken his fear for uncertainty. She had mistaken his loneliness for love. She had mistaken his presence for commitment. And now she understood. She had been standing inside someone else's unfinished story. "I wasn't her replacement," she whispered. "No." "Then what was I?" He looked at her. "You were someone I tried to love while I was still grieving someone else." Her face changed. For a moment, anger disappeared. Only sadness remained. The deepest kind. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that simply sits inside the chest and asks why it had to happen this way. She whispered, "You should have let me go." "I know. You should have let me find someone who was actually ready for me." "I know. You should never have made promises you couldn't keep." "I know." She covered her face. The room was still. Nobody knew what to say. Because sometimes the truth doesn't create an argument. Sometimes it destroys the need for one. He stepped closer. She immediately stepped backward. He stopped. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "You shouldn't. I don't expect you to understand." "I understand enough." He nodded. She looked at him through tears. "Do you know what hurts the most?" He waited. "It isn't that you loved her." Her voice trembled. "It isn't even that you still love her." She took a breath. "It is that you made me compete with someone who wasn't even standing in the room." His eyes filled with tears. She continued. "I was fighting a memory." The word struck him. "I was trying to prove I was worth choosing, while you had already chosen someone in your heart." He looked away. She whispered, "And I didn't even know there was a competition." Nobody spoke. The silence became unbearable. Then someone quietly left the room. Another followed. One by one, people began giving them privacy. But she didn't notice. Her world had narrowed to one sentence. She was never you. And somehow, those words contained an entire history. Every unanswered question. Every night she had cried alone. Every time she had wondered whether she was enough. Every moment she had blamed herself. She had spent months asking, "What did I do wrong?" Now she finally had an answer. Nothing. She hadn't been lacking. She had simply been loving someone whose heart was somewhere else. And sometimes that is the cruelest lesson love teaches. You can be kind enough. Beautiful enough. Patient enough. Loyal enough. You can give everything. And still be unable to heal a wound you didn't create. She turned toward the door. He called her name. She stopped. But she didn't turn around. "I need you to understand something," she said. "What?" "I don't hate you." He closed his eyes. "But I don't want you." He opened them again. She turned slowly. "I don't want to be the person you choose because another person didn't work out." Her voice was steady now. "I don't want to be your second realization." She wiped her tears. "I don't want to be the lesson you learn after hurting me." He stood completely still. "I wanted to be your first certainty." That sentence broke something inside him. She walked away. And for the first time that night, he understood the true meaning of his own words. She was never you. He had thought he was confessing that another woman had never replaced the first. But he hadn't realized the confession carried another truth. Neither had he. He had never been fully present with the woman standing beside him. He had brought an old love into a new relationship. He had asked someone innocent to pay the price for a wound she didn't cause. And now she was leaving. Not because she didn't love him, but because she finally loved herself enough to stop begging someone to see her. Outside, the night air was cold. She walked down the steps slowly. Her tears hadn't stopped. But something had changed. For months, she had cried because she believed she wasn't enough. Tonight, she cried because she finally knew she had been enough all along. Behind her, the door remained closed. Inside, he stood alone. The room that had been filled with voices now felt enormous. He looked at the empty chair where she had been sitting. And suddenly he remembered every small thing about her. The way she laughed when she was nervous. The way she remembered details nobody else remembered. The way she always asked whether he had eaten. The way she defended him even when he didn't deserve defending. The way she waited. Too long. He realized something terrifying. He had spent so much time remembering the woman he lost that he had failed to notice the woman he was losing. And by the time he noticed, she had already learned how to live without him. That was the punishment nobody had warned him about. Sometimes the person you take for granted doesn't leave because they stop loving you. They leave because loving you has started costing them their peace. And peace eventually becomes more valuable than promises. Weeks passed. They didn't speak. At first, he wanted to call. Then he wanted to explain. Then he wanted to apologize. Eventually, he realized none of those things would undo what happened. So he wrote a letter. Not to get her back. Not to manipulate her. Not to make himself feel better. He wrote because there were things he should have said when she was still standing in front of him. He wrote, "I was wrong. Not because I loved someone before you. But because I brought that unfinished love into the space you deserve to have entirely to yourself. You never deserved to feel like a comparison. You never deserved to wonder why my eyes sometimes looked distant. You never deserved to question your worth because I was too afraid to confront my past. I told you she was never you. But I realize now that you were never supposed to be her. You were supposed to be yourself. And I failed to love you as yourself. I hope one day you meet someone who doesn't need to lose you before understanding your value. Someone who doesn't make you wait for clarity. Someone who doesn't make you compete with memories. Someone who sees you and knows. I don't know whether that person will be me. I understand if it isn't. But I finally understand what you were trying to tell me. You weren't asking me to choose you over her. You were asking me to choose you without comparison. And I couldn't. I'm sorry." He folded the letter. He never sent it. Because sometimes an apology is not a request for another chance. Sometimes an apology is simply the final responsibility of someone who finally understands the damage they caused. Months later, they met again. It happened unexpectedly. A cafe. A rainy afternoon. She walked through the door. He looked up. Their eyes met. For several seconds, neither spoke. She smiled first. Not the old smile. A different one. A peaceful one. "How are you?" she asked. "Better." She nodded. You look happy. So do you. She sat across from him. There was no anger. No accusation. Just two people sitting across from the remains of something that once mattered deeply. He said, I meant what I said that night. She looked at him. She was never you. She waited. But I understand now that saying that wasn't enough. No, she said softly. It wasn't. He smiled sadly. You were never supposed to replace anyone. I know. You were supposed to be loved for who you were. She looked down. I know that now too. There was a long silence. Then she asked, do you still love her? He thought carefully. No. She looked surprised. What changed? I finally stopped confusing memory with love. She nodded slowly. And you? She smiled. I stopped confusing being needed with being loved. He understood. That was the ending. Not dramatic. Not perfect. Not the kind of ending movies usually create. Just two people who had finally learned the lessons they were too wounded to understand before. She stood. He didn't stop her. She walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned. Take care of yourself. You too. She smiled. Then she left. This time, he didn't chase her. Because he finally understood. Love isn't always proven by holding on. Sometimes love is accepting that someone deserves a life in which they don't have to wonder whether they are second choice. And somewhere beneath the grief, he was grateful. Because she had taught him something no one else could. A person should never have to hear, she was never you, in order to understand that they were worthy. They deserve to hear. You are you. And that is exactly why I chose you. The room had gone silent that night because everyone heard the words. But only two people understood their full weight. One person realized she had been comparing herself to a ghost. The other realized he had been carrying that ghost into every room. And perhaps that was why the silence mattered. Because sometimes silence is not emptiness. Sometimes silence is the moment when every lie finally disappears. The moment when excuses become useless. The moment when people stop pretending. The moment when someone realizes. The person I was trying to replace was never the problem. The person I was trying to forget was never the answer. The person standing in front of me was never supposed to be anyone else. And by the time I understood that, she had already learned to walk away. 3 months had passed since that night. 3 months since the room had fallen silent. 3 months since she had walked away after hearing the words that changed everything. She was never you. He had replayed that moment so many times that he could remember the exact expression on every face. But there was one face he couldn't escape. Hers. Not because she had cried. Not because she had been angry. But because she had looked at him with the quiet realization of someone who had finally understood that the person she had been trying to save had never been ready to save the relationship. Since then, he had changed. Not dramatically. There were no grand announcements. No social media declarations. No desperate attempts to make everyone believe he had become a different man. The change happened privately. He stopped making excuses. He stopped blaming timing. He stopped telling himself that circumstances had ruined everything. And most importantly, he stopped blaming her for leaving. Still, there were nights when he missed her. Not the idea of her. Not the comfort she had provided. Her. The actual person. The woman who had once known exactly how he took his coffee. The woman who could recognize his silence before he recognized it himself. The woman who had listened to stories he had never told anyone else. The woman who had once said, "You don't have to be strong with me." He hadn't understood the value of that sentence when she said it. Now he did. He had spent years believing strength meant hiding wounds. She had been the first person who invited him to stop hiding. And he had repaid her by making her feel like she wasn't enough. One evening, he received a message. It was from an old mutual friend. "She is moving." He stared at the screen. Nothing else. 3 words. But they felt heavier than an entire conversation. He typed. "Where?" He deleted it. Typed again. Deleted it. Finally, he put the phone down. He told himself it didn't matter. But his hands were shaking. The next morning, he heard the news again. She was leaving the city. A new job. A new apartment. A new beginning. He sat alone at the edge of his bed. For months, he had convinced himself that giving her space was the right thing. And it was. But now he realized something. Space could become distance. Distance could become a life. And a life could eventually become a place where he no longer existed. He had no right to interfere. Yet there was one thing he couldn't stop thinking about. She had left believing she was second. He wanted her to leave knowing she wasn't. Not because he wanted her back. Not because he wanted another chance. But because the last memory he had given her was a wound. He couldn't change the past. But perhaps he could change the meaning she carried from it. So he went to the place where they had first met. An old bookstore. Small. Quiet. Almost forgotten by everyone except them. She used to spend hours there. He remembered the first time he'd seen her. She had been sitting on the floor between 2 shelves, reading a book while everyone else searched for something quickly. He had asked her, "Are you planning to buy that?" She had looked up and said, "I'm deciding whether the book deserves me." He had laughed. "You're serious?" "Very." He had fallen in love with that confidence long before he realized it. Now he stood in the same place alone. He walked toward the shelf where she used to sit. There was a small handwritten note taped behind one of the books. He recognized her handwriting immediately. It wasn't addressed to him. It was something she had written months earlier. Perhaps for herself. Perhaps for no one. It said, "One day, I hope I stop asking why I wasn't enough for someone who was never emotionally available enough to receive me." He closed his eyes. His chest tightened. That sentence hurt because it was true. She had spent so much time questioning herself. And he had allowed it. He stood there for several minutes. Then he took out his phone. He opened her contact. He stared at her name. Finally, he typed. I heard you're moving. I won't ask you to stay. I won't ask you to meet me. I only wanted to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago. You were never second. You were never a replacement. You were never less than anyone. My inability to love you properly was never proof that you were difficult to love. It was proof that I was still carrying something I hadn't healed. You deserved better. I hope you find it. And I hope you never again question whether you were enough. He stared at the message. Then he sent it. For the first time in months, he felt peaceful. Not happy. Not relieved. Just peaceful. He didn't expect a response. None came. 2 days passed. Then 3. On the 4th night, his phone vibrated. Her name appeared. His heart stopped. The message was short. Thank you. Nothing more. He read it several times. Then another message appeared. I needed to hear that. He sat down. He didn't reply immediately. Then he wrote. You never needed to earn those words. She responded. I know that now. He smiled sadly. Then her next message arrived. But there is something you should know. He waited. I don't hate you. He closed his eyes. She continued. I hated what I became around you. He read the sentence twice. Then again. Another message. I became someone who constantly questioned herself. I started comparing my face, my personality, my kindness, my patience. I wondered what she had that I didn't. I thought if I became more understanding, more beautiful, more patient, maybe you would finally look at me the way you looked at her. His eyes filled with tears. Then. But I understand now. There wasn't something wrong with me. You were simply looking backward. He didn't know what to say. So he told the truth. Yes. She replied. And that is why I have to leave. He stared at the screen. I understand. She typed. Do you? Yes. A pause. Then. Then don't follow me. He didn't hesitate. I won't. Another pause. Good. Then nothing. The conversation ended. But this time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like closure. Until 1 week later. He received an invitation. A mutual friend's engagement. He almost declined. Then he saw her name on the guest list. His first instinct was to avoid her. His second instinct was to attend. He chose neither immediately. He thought about what she had asked. Don't follow me. He understood that showing up where she was might feel like following. So he decided not to go. But fate had other plans. The engagement venue was changed. His workplace was connected to the event through a business arrangement. He was required to attend. When he entered the hall, he didn't know she was already there. Then he saw her. She looked different. Not physically. Something deeper.